I'm James Swanwick. Welcome to the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast, where you learn to live a life of health, wealth, love, and happiness.
Hello and welcome. This is the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast. My name is Sarah Connolly and I coach in many of the alcohol-free lifestyle programs. And I'm so excited today to welcome our guest, Teri Patterson. Teri is not only a guest coach for us in the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle program, but more importantly, she is 8 years alcohol-free, or maybe even a little bit more now, actually. And she is a functional nutritional therapist. So what I'm interested to learn about from Teri today is something that a lot of people don't really pay that much attention to when they first quit alcohol, which is how to use nutrition and food to support the healing. Because we can tend to focus very much on the mind and changing how we think and changing how we feel psychologically, but there's a really important piece to this, which is how can we use our nutrition to support our healing when it comes to removing alcohol. Teri is an expert in this, so I'm really happy to welcome her today. Hi, Teri.
Hello, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
And is it 8 years or do we have a little more there?
Yeah, a little more than 8. It was 8 years in October.
October 2015, that's right. And Teri, you decided to go and study nutrition once you'd quit alcohol. You said you were so filled with energy that you were like, what do I do with this energy? What made you to decide to work and go into the nutritional area?
Well, it's funny because I was what I considered a wellness enthusiast. So before I stopped drinking alcohol, I was passionate about finding ways to be a healthier human. I remember one time I gave up coffee for like 7 years so I could drink green tea. I was doing green smoothies and all kinds of different things, cutting back on sugar, but I never really put together the piece of alcohol and nutrition. And so when I stopped drinking, and I did have all of this excess time and energy, as many of us discover, I wasn't zoning out on the couch anymore. I wasn't exhausted. I was getting good sleep. And I really wanted to find something positive to focus all this energy on. I mean, we can either choose to live an alcohol-free lifestyle by feeling deprived, or we can choose to live an alcohol-free lifestyle by embracing what now is possible. And for me, that looked like going to nutrition school.
Wow. And it's so important to highlight that because historically, I think there has been this focus on, poor me, I can't drink, I'm missing out, and it's shifting. And it's shifting through these types of conversations. So I'm really glad that you highlighted that we're not giving anything up when we quit alcohol. There's just so much to gain. And so you went on to study functional nutrition. And so I'm interested, first off, we'll go to the dark side. Let's start with the downsides of when, there are many downsides to drinking, but from a physical perspective, what are the ways in which alcohol depletes us physically? We know mentally it can really mess us around, but what about the physical side?
Well, I think what's really fascinating is that we don't talk about or really even recognize. And even when I went to nutrition school, I thought, wellness professionals would be talking about this. But what we miss is that alcohol is, once we drink alcohol, it's a toxin. And so when we have a toxin in our system, our body is designed to purge that toxin. And it affects every system in our body. So it affects our gut health. It affects our hormones. It affects our blood sugar. It affects our brain. It affects our immune system. And so there really is no part of our body that's not affected by alcohol. It'd be like taking any other poison. Your body it's going to have an impact. And what happens with alcohol, because for many, we use it not not just once. Like if you accidentally took rat poison, Sarah, your body would have a response, but you did it one time. But with alcohol, we're ingesting what is essentially a toxin again and again and again. And so it has short-term and long-term impacts.
Yeah. And I guess in contrast to a rat poison, where the effects would be pretty obvious, like you would know, that with alcohol, it's like death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's this slow build-up of these toxins that we're ingesting because they're diluted.
Yes. And one of the things that's interesting too is if we really explore alcohol from just a toxin, we see that early on we do see effects. We notice that our speech slows down. We notice we get, have clumsier movements. And we notice that maybe we have digestive upset. We notice that maybe we have a headache the next day. So all of these are pointing to the toxic effects of alcohol in our system. But as you mentioned, it's not like so obvious. It just is something that we culturally learn to accept. We have sayings, at least here in the United States, that like you initiate your 21st birthday by kissing the porcelain throne. So the porcelain throne, of course, being the toilet bowl and meaning that you vomit. And it's so incredible that we take something that really is so harmful. And if we look at it independent of the marketing, the fun and games of alcohol, we see that it really is, in fact, showing up like the poison that it is.
That's so true. I mean, I was just thinking about, the first vomit, throwing, purging, and it's almost seen as a rite of passage when it comes to your drinking experience, or at least when I was growing up.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had someone tell me, and she was a peer of mine, but she said, "Oh, we're drinking with our child this summer because he's going to go away to college and we want him to build up his tolerance." And when you think about how ridiculous that statement is, it points to the fact that we are really hiding, or we're putting alcohol behind this veil of something that is innocuous, and it's just not true. So you also asked, Sarah, about the ways that it impacts us. So I think one thing we really want to start with, in the school of nutrition that I went to, we focus first on digestion. If we're not digesting food, we're not absorbing the nutrients. And nutrient deficiency is at the root of so many causes of dis-ease. And so one thing that people would want to know, I think, is that when we drink alcohol, because it becomes a toxin, our body prioritizes the purging and the metabolism of this toxic substance over the digestion of food. So we interrupt our natural digestive property, our natural digestive process, in order to metabolize the alcohol and to purge it from our system. And what that means is that we have food hanging around in our stomach much longer than it should be. And this is one of the things that we notice when we have indigestion or digestive upset, or we, feel sick to our stomach or nauseous from drinking. Part of this is that we have undigested food, and it's hanging around, and it's, just kind of creating this cauldron or this batch of gunk that we're not metabolizing normally. And so that's one thing that people probably have noticed when they're drinking. And when we stop drinking alcohol and we start letting our body get back to normal digestion, a lot of things kick back into place and we can get back on track.
Absolutely. And this really is exciting to me as well to talk about gut health, because it ties in as well to mental health. Now we know more and more. And so let's go down this path a little bit in terms of how the gut and alcohol and the neurotransmitters that we so often talked about, the chemical messengers that tell our brains what to do and for us how to think, how to feel. How does that all tie in? Because obviously, and we know serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters responsible for how we feel, our mood, that is primarily produced in the gut. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So can you speak a little more to these neurotransmitters? Because they're kind of the buzzwords, the dopamine, the serotonin, the GABA. How does this all tie in?
Yes. Well, I think one of the things to think about is that food really is medicine. Our body is designed to ingest food, and that those nutrients then make all of the other systems in our body work. And so when we think about neurotransmitters, we've got to have not only the gut, but we have to have the autonomic nervous system working well. We need to have the vagus nerve stimulated and able to uptake those neurotransmitters from the gut to the brain. And so, there's the dynamic of how neurotransmitters work when they're working well. And then there is the opposite effect of when alcohol gets in the picture of how those things can be disrupted. And it's really there's a couple of things behind it. One is we need the nutrients to create the precursors for those neurotransmitters. So we have to go back to the food that we're ingesting, the food that we're absorbing, the food that we're using to kick off all of these natural mechanisms that create this gut-brain highway connection. And so when we are drinking alcohol, we're depleting a lot of the nutrients. Number one, because what I just talked about is we're not absorbing food properly. It's hanging around in the stomach too long. Sometimes we're just purging food because our stomach is too inflamed. And so we vomit instead of absorbing nutrients. So we see people with long-term, and it doesn't even have to be long-term, but we see people who are drinking and over-drinking with nutritional deficiencies. And this is the first place we see the disruption of those neurotransmitters doing the job they're supposed to.
Yeah. So is there any way, when someone removes alcohol and these processes start to get back on track, firstly, how long do you think it would take from when somebody stopped drinking to when these systems started to work together as they're meant to, as you describe?
Yeah, well, we see it with different parts of the body. We see them in a different timeline. For example, if we're talking about the mechanism of sleep, which requires, rebalancing of hormones, that can take a bit longer. When we're talking about neurotransmitters getting back to normal function or dopamine response, we've got dopamine receptors that become less sensitive when we're giving them that automatic hit of dopamine. So those take a bit longer. When I say longer, 3 to 6 months maybe. But we can start repairing our liver in as little as 24 hours. So some of these mechanisms, blood sugar is very dynamic. So blood sugar can be improved by eating protein when you have been depleted of those B vitamins and amino acid profiles. So we want to think about when we want to use nutrition to help us repair from alcohol use disorder and from drinking and over drinking, we really want to think about what we add and what we subtract.
Mm-hmm. So let's have a look at that. Some practical things that people could do. I mean, would it be fair to say that even if they make these changes prior to quitting alcohol, they would be beneficial?
Oh, absolutely. So, when you're first taking a break from drinking, and let's say you're in those early days, like 0 to 7 days, 1 to 7 days, you're on day 1, day 3, day 4. One of the most important things you can do is think about blood sugar regulation and how it relates to cravings. So when our blood sugar dips, when we're hungry, when we eat too many carbs, simple carbs or sugar, and our blood sugar plummets, we need to have protein in order to boost that blood sugar back up. And when our blood sugar gets low, we are operating at the very, lizard part of our brain. We're not really thinking. And so we tend to default to something we think is going to make us feel better. We don't necessarily understand, because we've been doing it for a long time, that, oh, yes, the body's not telling us, oh, this is a blood sugar dip. I need to eat food or drink water, or I need, what the body is saying is like full on red alert, do something. And that something often is whatever makes us feel good. That's very easy. And so this is where alcohol often shows up. So we want to use protein. I like to say, if you have a wine witching hour or a particular time of the day where you notice you start to really crave alcohol and it feels challenging, it's a great time to have a protein snack. So that might be 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It might be 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It might be a little earlier. And we want to eat a fair amount of protein. And that is going to help us get our prefrontal cortex back online. We're going to be able to think and make more rational decisions. We're not going to get in that hangry state where we're hungry and irritable.
That's so interesting, because I even notice that now, not drinking, that if I get to that point and, if I'm working all day and I'm not paying attention to what I'm eating, there'll come a point where I'm just like literally on autopilot. I will go into the pantry and I'll pick up a bag of chips or a bar of chocolate, whatever it is. But you're absolutely right. At that point in time, I'm not thinking from the smarter part of my brain. I'm like an animal. I just need to eat. And that really does, I think, speak to what it's like in those craving modes. If you're not taking care of your blood sugar, if you're not managing those levels, the cravings are a lot more intense, right? And a lot more hard.
Yes. And so that speaks to, one of the things that I like to have my clients do in the beginning is to eat more often smaller meals, prioritizing, healthy food, whole, nutrient-dense whole food. So one of the subtraction things, in addition to subtracting the alcohol, is we want to take out some of those extra processed foods. And we want to eat more high quality food. We want to help our body do the hard work of repairing. And your body wants to do it. It wants to come back into balance. We call it homeostasis. It's a beautiful mechanism, and it's designed to repair, but we want to give it all of the help that we can. So extra hydration, paying attention to a variety of food, getting some fiber, and really just resting and allowing your body to do that deeper work in those first few days can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking as I'm listening, though, that I know when people think about removing alcohol, there's this fear. I mean, it's a big deal for us all, for me, and I'm sure for you. So there's this idea, okay, well, I've got to take alcohol out, and I've got to stop eating sugar, and I've got to eat, all these other things. So what would be the one thing that you would recommend for somebody just starting out?
Yeah, I think the most important thing would be to eat those small meals and just have some more nutritious snacks. Like, it depends where you're starting from. So there's always a spectrum. It's kind of like with drinking water. There's a sort of an optimal amount of water you want to drink. But if you're drinking 8 ounces a day, don't, tomorrow drink 100 ounces a day. That's not the way to do it. You got to titrate up. So same with, removing what we might call junk food or less nutritious food. Like if you are never cooking at home, always eating fast food, you're not going to make these changes overnight. Right. What you really want to do, though, is think about each time you have food, a snack, a meal, think about balancing it with some protein and fat along with whatever else you're having. So let's say, you haven't had a very healthy lifestyle. You may just simply in the beginning want to eat your burger and fries with a half an avocado. Let's start small and support where we can. And then as we feel better, we can do more.
Yeah, so true. So it's just baby steps in those first couple of weeks. So to make the connection, if somebody did take these steps, they were quitting alcohol and they took just these little steps, what would be, in your opinion and experience, the biggest benefit in the shortest amount of time? What do people report? What do people see?
Yeah, so usually it is feeling less cravings.
Right.
So what we notice, it's kind of like with sugar. So I often work with people around alcohol. And then because I'm a nutritionist, we'll work around maybe they have substituted more sugar than they want in their diet. So with sugar, we know like the more sugar we eat, the more we want. Like if it's Halloween time in the United States and you've got candy everywhere you go, if you start eating a little candy here or there, your body's going to start craving more candy. And it's the same with alcohol. So when we remove alcohol and we're not starving, what we're finding is that, oh, I don't have as many cravings. And that protein really comes in, having those snacks, paying attention to not getting too hungry. And so I see that as one of the number one benefits is that people say, gosh, it's not as hard as I thought. I'm doing okay. Or the cravings don't last as long. And food can be a big reason that becomes true.
And that's huge, isn't it? Because it's the cravings that put so much fear into people. Because it's a horrible feeling to crave. And so if you can put those small support structures in place, the protein, some good healthy fats, just on a more regular basis throughout the day, your cravings will be less severe. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing to know.
Yes, yes. And then, eventually as we start to, our body starts to do the work of repair, we can continue to use food. And for some people, even supplements. I'm always food focused first because digestion is so important. But then we can start dialing in nutritionally things that really do help each individual get stronger, healthier, and really feel amazing on the other side of not drinking.
Yeah, which is what you must feel in order to make it a lifelong decision, right? If you feel terrible, then you'll go back.
Yes.
If you feel great and if you do all the things to support that and to enhance your lifestyle and how you feel, then you want to keep going.
Yes. And one of those things that is important to note is that if you are alcohol free and you've been alcohol free somewhere, north of 3 months and you're doing some good things for your body, maybe you're working on sleep hygiene, maybe you're, moving more and you're paying attention to your diet and you're not feeling as good as you thought you would, it's time to check in, go and get some labs and see if there's something underneath. Because when we're drinking and over drinking, it's hard to recognize what feeling good feels like.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I know from my own experience that people talk about having a lot of time. You said it at the beginning, when you stop drinking, you have all this time. What better way to spend your time than to be seeking out optimal health? I mean, to me, it's fascinating. And the more you learn, the more you can step up and go that next level and that next level. So that becomes, if you like, a healthy addiction as opposed to an addiction to something that's really just depleting you from the inside out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love to help people get back to enjoying cooking and enjoying food. Part of the reason I became a nutritionist is I'm a foodie. I love food. And so when people when we think about hormones, we often think about just the sex hormones, but we have to remember that we have hormones that regulate the functions of so many different systems in our body. And when it comes to hunger, we have, two hormones. We have our satiety hormone and our hunger hormone. The hunger hormone is ghrelin, the satiety is leptin. And when I work with people who are stepping away from alcohol, often those hormones have been really impacted by our drinking. And so they don't even know, Sarah, sometimes what hunger really feels like. Like, I don't know the last time I felt hungry, or I don't know the last time I really enjoyed, a meal. I just usually wolf down something standing over the sink because I'm busy, or I'm always eating in front of my computer. And so it's really fun to start to help people recognize that food is a very valuable nutrient, but it's also meant to be full of pleasure and enjoyment.
Yes. And I actually, interestingly, was at a restaurant the other day. I was at Cafe Sydney, which is a very fancy restaurant in Sydney. And I was with two people who were in their first year of being alcohol free. And they both said that the first couple of times you go to a restaurant, you're like, no, I would like to have the wine, but I know I'm not drinking right now. But once that you get past that, the enjoyment that they expressed about looking at the menu, about feeling and having that whole experience of food and company, that when you're drinking, it tends to be more about looking over your shoulder to see when the waiter's going to be coming to top up your glass, or at least that was what it was like for me.
Absolutely. And one experience I had that you're reminding me of, Sarah, was I went to a very fancy Michelin star restaurant here near where I live, which is in Northern California. So we don't have a ton. So this was a special treat. And they had the wine pairing with the meal. And I remember so distinctly. So I wasn't drinking. Of course, this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember that when I would drink, because I would drink and eat, I always thought that I couldn't have rich meals. I thought there was something wrong with me, like, oh, I just don't digest food well, or I can't eat rich food. But really, because alcohol prevents us from digesting, it just feels we get full. The rich food just sits there. We don't enjoy it to the level that we do when we're not drinking. And so now, having these lovely meals, they can even be multi-course. My body loves to eat delicious food, and I don't have weird digestive issues. Those were really from the alcohol.
Yeah. It is extraordinary when you start to really wake up to what I would call quite devastating effects to our physiology alcohol does have, and how, as you said earlier, there's this veil that's placed over it, and it's all acceptable and it's all fun and games, and we try to build up our tolerance when you really understand it's like, this is madness.
Yeah.
This is madness.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
So I want to come back to something you said earlier when you were talking about how the body prioritizes the metabolism of alcohol over everything else. Mm-hmm. And although this is a big topic, I do want to touch on it because many of our listeners are women, and women who are moving through that stage of life, perimenopause to menopause. So I wonder if you would be willing to speak a little to that whole process, because prioritizing the metabolism of alcohol also means that the hormones which are running wild at that stage of our lives are being neglected through that metabolic process as well. Mm-hmm. What and how does that impact women, particularly at that most vulnerable stage of perimenopause through to menopause?
Yes. So we want to think about menopause. It was so funny. I was looking at an article recently, and it was saying that menopause is like they classify it as disease, or not a disease, but just like this weird thing. And it's like, no, like it shouldn't and doesn't have to be that way. And so, it is a natural process, but of course it's kind of like, when we go through puberty, it's natural, but it doesn't mean that your hormones are behaving in any systematic way. And so here we are at this time of our life, and I've been doing a lot of study or personal just inquiry into midlife, and really thinking about how these transitions we go through, particularly as women, affect our drinking and over drinking. And just for your listeners, I stopped drinking when I was 55. So I already was through menopause, and I was experiencing symptoms that really reduced when I took alcohol out of the picture. But what we see is that sleep is a huge part of metabolizing hormones, detoxifying our brain, helping us lose weight, helping all of these things. And so if we just take sleep, for example, and we know that sleep is disrupted by all of the things that happen in menopause, it's one of the number one things that happens is that we start maybe having hot flashes, night sweats. It disrupts our sleep. That lack of sleep then becomes its own devil, if you will, and it impacts all of these other processes. So, we have to understand that being cognizant of how to support ourselves in menopause is going to make a difference with all of this. And I've been doing some research, and this is maybe a little off topic, but really thinking, because I heard this little snippet, Sarah, about women and hormone replacement therapy, and how when our estrogen drops and this imbalance happens, we can be in a place where we're going to have more cravings for things like alcohol. We're looking for stress reduction. We're looking for something to help us sleep. And so we're now seeing studies. I read a PubMed study just yesterday about balancing our hormones can make a huge difference in addiction behavior for women in these perimenopause and menopause stages. And then if we add in the transitions of midlife, so it's really kind of a double whammy that women are often at the peak of their career. They're often parenting teenagers. They might be caring for elderly parents. They may be suffering their own decline in health somewhere along the way. And now, menopause shows up. And so we really want to look at lifestyle support as well as, the physical mechanisms of hormone. And so we've got to be prioritizing sleep. We've got to be prioritizing mental health. We've got to be using tools that help us reduce stress. We really do need to be focusing on blood sugar regulation. It's all part of why we see so many women who find that going through menopause is just not as natural as maybe it could be, like having way more dramatic symptoms.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think this is, we were saying earlier, we're not talking about alcohol in a way, or we're starting to talk about alcohol in a way that's not drinking is aspirational. It's a lifestyle choice. It's a healthy choice. We're also starting to be more open about menopause. And I don't know about you, but I'll share with the listeners, when I started perimenopause, I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on because nobody was talking about it. But I noticed that I was blacking out. So, and I see this happening in a lot of women who are starting the perimenopause. The anxiety is increasing. And as you've pointed out, you're at a stage in your life where you're, many plates are spinning in the air. And the alcohol is not being metabolized, as I understand it, in the same way, because there are all these hormones that also need attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it manifested as lack of memory, which had never happened before in my drinking. The same amount of alcohol was having a more dramatic effect. So I was drinking the same amount, but I was having a much more negative response to that. Obviously, as you mentioned, sleep was down the toilet, literally. So I do know from personal experience, and for the listeners, if you are noticing that alcohol is affecting you differently, then that's something to really pay attention to. Would you agree, Teri?
Oh, yes. And one of the things you mentioned, Sarah, sleep. So we don't realize that when we're blacking out, and blackouts with over drinking is so interesting because we can function to everyone else, it looks normal. And
Yes.
so we're operating. Some people are even driving cars, picking, supervising toddlers at a swimming pool. I mean, I've heard some really potentially scary events happening while someone is functioning so-called normally and appearing to be in full capacity, but not. And one of the mechanisms that I was most surprised about was that when we go to sleep at night, we have REM sleep, we have deep sleep, and these help us create short-term memory. And so when we are not, when we're passing out rather than falling asleep, when the alcohol is creating this unconscious state, we're not getting REM and deep sleep. And so not only are we not having the REM sleep that helps us detoxify our brain, but we also aren't having that deep sleep that helps with that short-term memory. So my understanding, and I'm not a sleep expert, but my understanding, Sarah, is that part of that blackout is that we had we had some awareness of what was happening, which is why we're functioning. But then when we go to sleep, we're not converting that short-term memory. And so we wake up and there's no recollection.
Wow. And that's no fun. That is no fun.
No, I had such an embarrassing moment with my son-in-law where I recreated a conversation we'd had the night before. And he and my daughter both looked at me and said, "We talked about all of that. You said exactly that last night. Don't you remember?" And it was one of those signs that was like, this is now my level of drinking is in a different level.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally relate. And it's an awful experience that many of our clients talk about, that you wake up and you're looking to see the expression on the face of your partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it just gives me that horrible, almost post-traumatic stress when I think about that in my own life.
Yeah. And so, as you mentioned, if we are noticing that we're more impacted by alcohol, the body is such a beautiful messenger. And one of the things that, I've been so grateful for in my after alcohol life is just being more in touch with how my body is responding to food, to rest, to stress, to my environment, to toxic people. And so, this is really your body is trying to get your attention. And if your mood swings are out of control, if it just feels like you're struggling so much in these perimenopause, menopause symptoms, it's time to really pay attention. And, I like to say that your body will get your attention in many, many ways. And then something will usually get extreme if we are not paying attention. I don't know if this has ever been your experience, Sarah, but I have friends or acquaintances and they'll say, "Oh yeah, things have just been really crazy, been really stressed and this and this and this. I know I need to take a break." And they'll go on like this for a few months. And then they'll say, "Well, guess what? I just broke my foot. So now I'm taking a break." Yeah. And so pay attention before the crisis happens. Honor what your body is trying to tell you and explore ways to, either through alcohol-free lifestyle and their beautiful programs or whatever works for you, explore ways to reduce alcohol and notice what can change. Again, you're going to notice some improvement so quickly. And once we start to feel better, we can demand more of our body. When we're depleted all the time and we're not sleeping and alcohol's showing up and we're not operating at full brain capacity and the stress is building, cortisol's out of control because blood sugar, it's really hard to imagine doing something like not drinking. But if we can get those first few days, our body is going to then support us into this very healthy journey.
Yeah, I love what you said about your body is a beautiful messenger if you're able to hear it. And when you're drinking, you can't hear it. And sadly, as you've also shared, if you don't take the steps to listen, then something will intervene and do it for you. And it's usually not something pretty.
Yeah.
And so I love that, I got this image when you were speaking about, when you're drinking, it's like you've shut this child in a dark room with the door shut and you don't want to listen. You don't want to hear it. And that child is screaming like, help me, help me. I know that's pretty dark, but that's the image that came up for me. If you're not listening to your body, you literally are shutting yourself in a dark room. And eventually.
Yeah. And as we've heard and we know, your body is the only place you have to live. And so if we're ignoring all of the warning signs, it's really sad. Sometimes I have clients say, well, I was really hoping that I would get that scary diagnosis from my doctor that meant I had to stop drinking. And one of the most empowering things we can do is ask ourselves that question instead of, do I need to stop drinking? We can ask that wonderful question that really opens up the possibility and ask, is drinking adding anything to my life? And that's a beautiful place to start. I always love to invite people to do two things around this journey. One is get curious. I really believe that curiosity suspends judgment. So rather than beating ourselves up, we can just say, what if I could go? What if I could take a 3-day break? I wonder how that would feel. Rather than saying, well, you can't do 3 days. You can't even do 1 day. That doesn't really serve us. So try asking yourself with a curious eye, what might be possible? And then I love to set an intention and help my clients set intentions around this journey. What are you open to? What might happen in this experience that you're allowing yourself? We don't need to have a really goal-oriented expectation. Often expectations leave us disappointed. I have so many people, because of my work with nutrition and alcohol, say, well, I want to lose weight. And it's like, that's beautiful. However, what else are you open to? Are you open to just feeling better? Are you opening to be able to hear your body when it's asking for support? Are you open to feeling some new emotions? Are you open to feeling more authentic with yourself? Those types of intentions, I think, serve us so much better than having the really black and white goals that we may not, there's no timeline in this journey. So while things will improve, we don't want to set ourselves up for, well, if I don't lose 10 pounds in the first 30 days, I'm not doing this. We need to have a more open-minded approach, I believe.
I totally agree. Curiosity is, as you say, it doesn't have that judgment aspect to it. So curiosity with compassion is always my go-to when it comes to working with myself first and foremost and with others, because we can be so quick to judge. And like you say, we set these big high expectations and then pull ourselves down when we don't meet them. Mm-hmm. So this approach of curiosity and compassion, and even that in and of itself, I think settles the nervous system a little bit.
Yes.
Instead of being in that achieve and fight the dragons, we're in this open-minded let's see, let's explore,
mm-hmm.
which is so much more open and expansive. I love that, Teri. I could talk to you all day. I had a question that popped up into my head that I'm not sure if you're not prepared for it, so I'm going to ask it anyway. What is your protocol? Like, what is your, from morning till night, what do you do, Teri? Because you look incredible. You're in your 60s. You look like you're in your early 50s. You're walking the walk. So what is it that you do that you could share with our listeners? They might be able to pinch a couple of gems, a couple of ideas.
Yeah, well, thank you for that beautiful compliment. I do think that many of us, if we see these before and after photos, we find ourselves aging in reverse. And it's such a beautiful visual of what the body is doing on the inside. So for me, when I went through nutrition school and I was early days alcohol free, I really just allowed myself to make a lot of changes around what I was eating, how much water I was drinking, what water I was drinking, what I was doing with sugar, all of those things. And because I get to I think there's a couple of other things too. So nutrition has been a big part of feeling well. And so there is this, in the nutrition world, there's this illness wellness continuum. And if we think about this long arrow, one direction is pointing to wellness and one direction is pointing to disease. If we put ourselves in a neutral place and we start in the middle, everything we do is helping us move toward a disease state or an optimal wellness state. And that everything includes all of the lifestyle components where I would put nutrition in there, what we're eating. Also, though, sleep, as we talked about, movement, stress reduction. And so for me, my non-negotiable is my gratitude journal in the morning. And so that is the first thing that I do every morning. I also, and this I think is very important too, I don't sleep with my phone in my room. I don't look at my phone until after I've done my gratitude practice. And that really helps me stay excited about the day and engaged in the present moment instead of getting jacked up about the past or the future. And I also haven't listened or read the news intentionally. People tell me what's happening. I'm not ill-informed, but I don't just randomly let the clickbait of the world take over my brain. And that's been very powerful for me. And that started even before my alcohol-free journey. I also have really, prioritizing my relationships and communication. I think that has allowed me to stay in a level of intimacy with other people and that connection. We've heard it said that, connection is the opposite of addiction. And so I really have learned to prioritize and work on connecting with other people. And it's not always in real life. I have many new friends in this alcohol-free journey that are not in my physical location, but we make it a point to get together and to connect and to stay in touch and to talk about, I call it big talk. When I was drinking, it was all small talk. And now I have people that I feel deeply connected to. And I think that is one of the most important things that help us thrive and help us really feel a sense of purpose. And I think probably the final thing, Sarah, I love this work. And I think that I feel so blessed to do this work and to connect with people around what I consider true wellness, which is wellness without alcohol. And that lights me up and gives me a deep sense of purpose. And I think that might be part of what you see in this physical body is the energy that's coming from the sheer joy that I get to be in this place.
Wow. Just beautiful, Teri. You can see it. I don't know if you're listening to this, you won't see the visual, but It's pure energy and light. And I totally agree with you in regards to purpose. And I loved what you said about big talk.
Mm.
Many of us, I think, when we remove alcohol, realize that we were drinking to actually get by in a lot of situations because there's not a lot of big talk.
Yeah.
And if you like big talk, which I do, and I know you do too, you have to actively go out and find it. And you're not going to find it with a glass of wine in your hand.
No. And that's why they call cocktail parties or small talk parties.
Yeah, right?
And maybe small brain too, right, Sarah?
Oh, yes, maybe. Well, Teri, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. I did want to share with the listeners a little tip that I got from Teri on a call. She comes in and coaches in AFL, and our members love hearing from Teri because she has all these hacks. And the hack that she gave me was when you have a sweet craving. Well, I'm going to ask you, Teri, what do you do when you have a craving for chocolate?
Well, and this is funny. I knew you were going to say this when you started the story, and it's not, every time you want to have chocolate, but if you are just like, okay, I can't get a hold of the sugar monster and I've been eating too many sweets. And so I'm just going to go in the kitchen and I'm just going to eat the thing. Have a pickle because your brain is going to say, wait, what just happened? My taste buds exploded in a way I wasn't expecting. And it's almost like you've made your neural pathways do a left turn instead of a right turn. And you've just sort of shocked your sensations into a completely different experience. And so it's just a way to have a little bit of fun with knowing that your body really does respond to what you're putting in your mouth, and it can make a big difference.
I love that. And so to summarize, your body responds to what you put in your mouth. And that's the bottom line. So thank you, Teri, for sharing all of your wisdom and for lighting up my screen on a very rainy, miserable day in Brisbane. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners? Any last tip or word of wisdom before we finish?
Well, I'll just say that it's always a privilege to come. You mentioned that I am so fortunate to come and guest coach in the alcohol-free lifestyle programs. And one of the things that I love about this community in particular is that it is a mixed group. And so you might be in a group with someone who is 3 days in their alcohol-free journey or someone who's 80 days. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful in this journey is that wherever you are, you can be that lighthouse for someone else. You are just a little further ahead, shining the light, sharing your experience. And it's so powerful to be in these mixed groups because one person may be saying, oh, I'm so inspired by you. You're further along than I am. I see your growth and I'm new, and that gives me hope. And the person who's brand new, someone who's further along can say, oh yes, gosh, I forgot that was me. I forgot that I didn't yet have this spark or this hope. And so it's such a really powerful thing. So find your community, I think would be, my last little tip. And make sure that you are surrounded by people who are cheering you on and believe the best in you. I think that's such an important part of this journey.
Well, thank you so much, Teri. And if you're listening and you want to connect with Teri, her details will be below the show notes. Thank you, Teri, so much. I've taken a lot away from our conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will have too. So I'm going to go and eat a pickle or two.
I think that's the perfect way to end.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Teri.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. For more content like this, you can check out our YouTube channel at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me and send me a direct message on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. And you can see the results of our scientific study at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/study. If you'd like to apply to become a Stop Drinking client, you can visit alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. I wrote a book called The 30-Day No Alcohol Challenge, which you can find on Amazon at james@alcoholfreelifestyle.com. If you're a regular listener of the show, would you please do me a big favor and give the show a rating and a review? It helps us get more listeners, and you'll be potentially helping someone else out there who's struggling with alcohol to find us, to listen to us and get support. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.